You know how we're always kind of hunting for those investments? The ones with that really interesting risk-reward balance?
The asymmetric ones.
Exactly, where, your potential loss is sort of capped, but the upside, well, it could be massive.
Right.
And that's exactly what caught our eye today. It's the warrants for Nuvation Bio. They trade under NUVB.WS and also NUVB.W.
Yeah, same thing, just different tickers some places use.
Right. And we're looking at what might be maybe a bit of a shortcut to some potentially significant returns, but with a downside that, looks pretty contained, at least initially.
Yeah, absolutely. And what makes these Nuvation warrants particularly interesting right now is exactly that point. Your maximum risk is, well, it's basically the price you pay for the warrant. 20, maybe 25 cents right now, around there.
Okay.
But if the main Nuvation stock, NUVB, really takes off, the gains for people holding the warrants, they're not just big, they're like theoretically unlimited.
That asymmetry, yeah, that's the hook.
It really is.
Okay, so let's maybe back up a tiny bit. What exactly is a warrant? For anyone listening who's maybe not dealt with them much.
Sure. So a warrant gives you the right, but importantly not the obligation, to buy a share of the company's stock.
At a set price.
At a specific price. Yeah, the strike
Yeah.
price. And you have until a specific date to do it.
Okay, and for these Nuvation Bio warrants, that strike price is $11.50.
$11.50, correct.
And the date. This is actually really important because I've seen some conflicting info out there.
Ah, yes, the expiry date confusion.
Right, some places listed as like July 2027.
Yeah, that's wrong. We checked the actual warrant agreement. It's February 10th, 2026.
February 10th, 2026. Okay, so that's what, roughly 9 months from now, give or take?
About that, yeah. Just under 9 months, which is, well, it's not a huge amount of time.
No, and that 9-month window is pretty critical, right? Because it lines up directly with some potentially huge news for the company. We'll get into that.
Definitely. And the power of these warrants, the leverage, it really kicks in if that stock price gets above the $11.50 strike before February 2026. If that happens, the warrant basically captures all that extra value, the in-the-money amount.
And the really exciting part, unlike some other things, there's no ceiling on that, right? If the stock just keeps going up.
Exactly. No cap.
Yep.
The warrant tracks the difference between the stock price and $11.50.
Okay, maybe some quick numbers would help visualize that.
Sure. So let's say you buy a warrant today for, say, 20 cents, just using round numbers.
Okay.
If Nuvation stock, NUVB, hits $15 before expiry, that warrant could be worth around $3.50. That's the 15 minus the 11.50 strike.
Wow, okay, so $3.50 from a 20-cent investment. That's like more than 15x.
Potentially, yeah. And if the stock went to, say, $20, then the warrant could be worth about $8.50.
$8.50. You see the explosive potential there? That's the leverage.
That is exactly the appeal. You get this amplified exposure to the upside for a relatively small initial cost.
Right. And you mentioned warrants were issued to AnHeart shareholders, too.
Yes, as part of the acquisition. And they have the exact same terms, same strike, same expiry. So
Yeah.
Everyone's playing by the same rules there.
Got it. Okay, so when you see this kind of potential setup, you immediately look at who's running the show, right? The management team.
Absolutely critical in biotech,
Yeah.
maybe more than any other sector.
And Nuvation Bio's leadership, there are some pretty impressive names involved, starting with David Hung.
Dr. David Hung, yeah, founder of Nuvation.
Anyone who follows biotech knows that name. Xtandi.
Exactly, Xtandi. That was a huge success story in prostate cancer treatment. And what's interesting is Nuvation, they didn't have any revenue for almost 10 years before Xtandi finally hit.
Wow. 10 years. Takes persistence.
It does. And then ultimately Pfizer bought Nuvation for, what was it, $14.3 billion?
$14.3 billion. Yeah, that's quite the track record, taking something from zero to that kind of exit.
It really is. And then more recently, they acquired AnHeart Therapeutics.
Right, and that brought in another layer of expertise. People like Junyun Wang.
Yeri Wang.
Yeah, Dr. Wang.
Yeah.
He was co-founder and CEO of AnHeart. Now he's on Nuvation's board. He led the development strategy for the very drugs we're talking about, taletrectinib, cefusidenib, plus experience at Novartis. Worked on ceritinib there, too.
Okay, so deep experience
Yeah.
in these specific drug classes.
And then there's Bing Yan, Dr. Bing Yan,
Uh-huh.
co-founder and former chief medical officer at AnHeart. Now he's the CMO at Nuvation. We're talking over 20 years in pharma R&D. head of Pfizer Asia Pacific at one point.
Wow.
Helped get drugs like Xalkori, Prevnar 13, Enbrel approved. And get this, he used to be an FDA reviewer.
An FDA reviewer. Okay, that's invaluable insight to have internally, especially with a big FDA decision coming up.
You'd think so, right? And then there's Lihua Zheng, also from AnHeart.
The chief business officer there. Right. He's the one who originally in-licensed taletrectinib and cefusadenib from Daiichi Sankyo. He also handled out licensing deals for certain regions, brought in significant milestone payments, raised over $100 million in venture capital, and he helped build Zai Lab's oncology portfolio before AnHeart.
Okay, so you've got the deal-making side covered, too.
Exactly. So what you have now is this, combination. You've got the Medivation Xtandi success story with Dr. Hung, plus the AnHeart team that actually developed these specific assets and got them breakthrough therapy designation.
And you said collectively they've guided, what, 10-plus drugs through approval?
Over 10 blockbusters, yeah. Between them. It's a serious amount of regulatory experience for a company this size. It potentially, de-risks things a bit.
Okay, so strong management, leverage financial instrument.
Yeah.
But what actually makes the stock move? What's in the pipeline?
Right, the catalysts. And thanks to that AnHeart deal, they've got several interesting things going on. The lead asset, the one everyone's focused on right now, is taletrectinib.
The ROS1 inhibitor we mentioned.
Exactly. ROS1 inhibitor. And this is the big one, near term. The FDA accepted their new drug application, the NDA,
Okay.
and they granted it priority review. That's for ROS1 positive non-small cell lung cancer. Importantly, it's line agnostic, meaning regardless of prior treatment.
And the deadline for the FDA decision? The PDUFA date?
June 23rd, 2025. So very soon.
Wow, okay.
And this application is based on, the biggest data set ever for this type of cancer. Over 300 patients. Plus, it's already approved in China. That happened back in January.
China approval. That's usually a good sign, right? De-risks it somewhat.
It certainly helps, yeah. And it sounds like the U.S. process is moving along, too. You mentioned FDA inspections.
Yeah, the FDA inspections are already done. That's a big step. And Nuvation even started an expanded access program back in February.
Which usually suggests the company feels pretty confident about approval and wants to get the drug to patients who need it, even before the official nod.
Right. And didn't the FDA also give it breakthrough therapy designation earlier?
They did, which signals the FDA sees it as potentially offering a substantial improvement over existing therapies for a serious condition. And the data from China was pretty eye-popping, something like a 92% overall response rate.
92%. Yeah, that's impressive data.
It really is. And the market they're targeting, it's significant. Just ROS1 lung cancer plus thyroid cancer could be, around $1.2 billion a year globally? Nuvation's own models internally peg the U.S. market alone for ROS1 lung cancer at maybe $3.8 billion annually after a few years on the market.
$3.8 billion just in the U.S., if that happens.
That kind of revenue potential is exactly what could make the stock price jump significantly, and those warrants. Well, you saw the map.
Yeah. Okay, so taletrectinib is the main event. What else is cooking?
They also have cefusadenib. That's a Miley's DH1 inhibitor.
Right, for brain tumors, glioma.
Yeah, diffuse IDH1 mutant glioma. It's designed to get into the brain, which is key. They're running a pivotal phase 2 trial right now.
And when do we see results from that?
Top-line results, and maybe their plan for phase 3, are expected in the second half of this year, so H2 2025. Early data look promising in both low-grade and high-grade gliomas.
Okay. And who owns the rights to that one?
Daiichi Sankyo has Japan. Nuvation has the rest of the world. They'd be competing against Servier's drug, Tipsavo, which already does pretty well. So positive data there could be another nice catalyst.
Gotcha. Anything else earlier stage?
Yep. NUV-1511, that's their own proprietary drug conjugate. Sort of like an ADC, but a small molecule version.
Right.
It's targeting advanced solid tumors. They're in phase 12, dose escalation now. We might get some results or at least an update by late 2025. If that looks good, it could validate their whole platform technology.
And open up more possibilities down the line.
Exactly. And finally, there's NUV-868, a BATE inhibitor.
Ah, right. I remember hearing about that one. How's that doing?
Well, the earlier trials, both alone and in combos, didn't show amazing efficacy. So they've kind of paused new phase 2 studies for now. They're figuring out the next steps, maybe different combinations, maybe partnering it out for other uses. It's more of a question mark right now.
Okay, so definitely some shots on goal, but taletrectinib is front and center.
By far.
Yeah.
especially for the warrants with that 9-month clock ticking.
Right. Let's talk about that timing risk again. February 2026 expiry, 9 months. What's the absolute biggest worry for someone holding those warrants?
Well, it's got to be the taletrectinib decision. Any significant delay past that June 23rd PDUFA date, that would hurt.
Or worse?
Or worse, a CRL, a complete response letter from the FDA. Basically a no for now.
Ooh, yeah.
If either of those happens, those warrants, they could lose a huge chunk of their value, maybe even all of it, really fast.
But as we said, there are some mitigating factors, maybe. A priority review.
Right. The inspection's reportedly being done.
The expanded access program suggesting confidence.
Exactly. None of it guarantees approval, obviously. The FDA is the FDA. But the signs right now seem more positive than negative for taletrectinib.
Okay. And delays in the other programs, like the glioma drug or the ADC?
That would dent confidence, for sure. But the warrant value between now and February, it's overwhelmingly tied to that taletrectinib outcome. The others are more secondary in this specific time frame.
Got it. Okay, let's pivot to valuation then. You mentioned the company structure, about 340 million shares out.
Roughly, yeah. And a pretty healthy cash balance, somewhere between like $460 and $500 million reported in Q1.
Which works out to about $1.36 per share in cash.
Around there. And their market cap is currently hovering around $700 million.
So if you subtract the cash from the market cap, you get the enterprise value, which is pretty low, like $240 million.
Relatively low, yeah. Especially considering the potential of taletrectinib. If it gets approved, it suggests the market isn't fully pricing in that success yet.
Which could mean upside if things go well.
That's the idea. If taletrectinib hits anything close to those internal projections, $3.8 billion peak U.S. sales, even after costs, that's potentially hundreds of millions in profit annually. That would likely justify a much higher valuation than $700 million market cap.
There are always buts in biotech, right? What could dampen that enthusiasm or those projections?
Well, first, taletrectinib was licensed from Daiichi Sankyo. So Nuvation owes them royalties, milestones. The exact terms aren't public, but that will take a slice.
Okay, standard pharma deal stuff.
Right. And then there's that financing deal they did with Sagard Healthcare.
The non-dilutive one? That sounded good.
It avoided selling stock, which is good, but it involves Nuvation paying Sagard a royalty on U.S. taletrectinib sales. It's mid-single digits, tiered.
Yeah.
Like 5.5% up to $600 in sales, then less above that.
So another slice off the top, even before the Daiichi payments, how much does that really impact things if sales are in the billions?
It definitely takes a bite, maybe shaves off some of the very top-end profit potential.
Right.
But if the drug is doing billions, there's still plenty left from Nuvation. It just means the absolute peak revenue isn't quite as high as it might look initially.
Okay. What else? The trial data itself.
Yeah, the geography. Remember, it's already approved in China, based largely on the TRUST-I trial done there. It's licensed out in China and Japan. The FDA's submission relies heavily on that China TRUST-I data, plus a smaller global study, TRUST-II. Some analysts are a bit cautious about how the FDA will view an approval package based so much on data from China.
Is that a common concern, FDA looking closely at foreign data?
It can be. They look at how the trial was run, patient differences, local standards of care. It's definitely something they scrutinize. The data might be great, but the FDA has its own process. It's a known risk factor here.
Okay. And if, worst case, taletrectinib stumbles, can the other drugs pick up the slack for the warrants?
Unlikely within that 9-month window. The glioma market is smaller. The ADC is early. The warrants really need taletrectinib to hit, or at least show very strong signs of hitting soon.
So the uncertainties are the partner payouts, how the FDA views the China data, hitting those big sales numbers?
Pretty much. Those are the main valuation risks to watch. Though, on the plus side, that recent $250 million financing deal they got, part of this tied to FDA approval.
So the lenders seem confident enough to tie funding to that milestone.
It suggests they're gearing up for a potential launch, making sure the money is there when needed.
Okay, so high risk, potentially high reward with the warrants. What about just buying the regular stock, NUVB?
That's always an option, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who's maybe a bit more risk averse.
How does that compare?
Well, with the common stock NUVB, you don't get that same extreme leverage. A $1 move in the stock is just a $1 move for you. But your absolute downside risk is arguably less tied to that single binary event. You still own a piece of the company, it's cash, the rest of the pipeline, even if taletrectinib fails. The stock might drop hard, but maybe not to zero immediately like a warrant could.
And you benefit from that cash buffer, the $1.36 per share. Though the stock's trading above that now, right? Around $2.10.
Yeah, so there's still downside risk with the stock, obviously, but it's a different profile. More stability, less potential for that explosive short-term gain the warrants offer.
So common stock is less volatile, less potential upside, maybe less immediate downside than the warrants expiring worthless.
Exactly. It's a trade-off. Warrants are the direct, high-octane bet on those near-term catalysts, especially taletrectinib.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, Nuvation bio warrants, NUVB.WS or NUVB.W, they definitely look like that asymmetric bet we started with.
Yeah, limited downside, just the cost of a warrant, 20-25 cents right now. But the upside is uncapped if things go well before February 2026.
And the main thing is taletrectinib approval this summer, if that happens.
If that happens, Nuvation could transform pretty quickly into a commercial stage oncology company, potentially worth billions based on those market estimates.
Which could easily send the warrants up many times their current price. Even good news on the glioma drug, safusidenib, later this year could add more fuel.
Would definitely help, yeah. Add to the positive momentum.
But if that ROS1 drug gets delayed significantly or gets a CRL from the FDA,
then those warrants could lose value very, very quickly, potentially becoming worthless by expiry. It's the flip side of the leverage.
absolutely. High stakes indeed. So a final thought maybe for the listener to chew on.
Given this setup, the potentially huge reward versus a known, relatively small cost for the warrants,
Yeah.
how comfortable are you with that kind of risk, especially with a major catalyst just weeks away and a management team that, have done this before in the tough world of biotech?
Right. Does it make sense maybe to dig even deeper, look into the FDA's priority review process nuances, maybe try to find more detail on those TRUST-I and TRUST-II trial results yourself before making a decision?
It's definitely worth considering, depending on your own approach to risk and research.